The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Peter Wilson's apartment as his alarm blared for the third time. He groaned and finally rolled out of bed, knowing he was already behind schedule. Today was not a day to be late. The Chicago meeting represented everything he'd worked toward for the past 2 years at Turner Marketing. "Come on, Pete, get it together," he muttered to himself as he rushed through his morning routine, skipping breakfast and barely taking time to check if his tie matched his shirt. His phone buzzed with a text from his boss. "Tom, confirmation that clients will all be there. Don't mess this up." No pressure, Peter thought, grabbing his pre-packed suitcase and hurrying out the door. The taxi he'd called was thankfully waiting, and Peter jumped in with a quick "Airport, please." "Terminal B." As the taxi navigated the morning traffic, Peter rehearsed his presentation points in his head. At 34, he was younger than most executives at his level, and he knew some people were just waiting for him to fail. This presentation could secure the biggest client his company had ever worked with, and Tom had reluctantly given Peter the lead after his successful work with smaller accounts. The taxi pulled up to the departures area, and Peter paid quickly, adding a generous tip for the driver who had managed to get him to the airport in record time despite the traffic. He still had a chance to make his flight if everything went perfectly. Rolling his carry-on behind him, Peter Power walked through the terminal entrance, mentally calculating the time needed to get through security. His boarding pass on his phone showed the flight to Chicago was scheduled to begin boarding in 30 minutes. Tight, but doable. The security line moved surprisingly quickly, and Peter felt a wave of relief as he collected his belongings on the other side. He checked the departures board, Gate 11A. He had about 20 minutes before boarding would begin. Enough time to grab a coffee and maybe a muffin to settle his empty stomach. Standing in line at the coffee shop, Peter scrolled through his emails, double-checking that he had all the materials needed for the presentation. His focus was so intense that he almost didn't notice when his turn came at the counter. "Sorry," he said to the barista with an apologetic smile. "Small black coffee and a blueberry muffin, please." As Peter waited for his order, he noticed an older woman at a nearby table struggling to stand up. She looked to be in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a simple but elegant gray coat. What caught Peter's attention was the way her hands trembled as she tried to grip both her walking cane and her small carry-on bag at the same time. The woman nearly lost her balance, and Peter instinctively stepped forward, forgetting about his coffee order. "Excuse me, ma'am, can I help you with that?" he asked, reaching out to steady her arm. The woman looked up at him with pale blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "Oh, that's very kind of you, young man. I'm afraid these old bones don't work like they used to." Peter smiled back, taking her carry-on bag. "No problem at all. Are you heading to a gate?" "Yes, dear. Gate 32B. I'm visiting my granddaughter. She just had her first baby, a little girl." Her face lit up with pride. "My first great-grandchild." Peter's smile froze slightly as he processed what she'd said. Gate 32B was in the opposite wing of the airport from his own gate. He glanced at his watch, 18 minutes until boarding. "Sir, your coffee and muffin," called the barista from behind him. Peter turned back, quickly paid and grabbed his order, juggling it with his own bag and now the woman's carry-on. "I'm Helen. By the way," the woman said as Peter helped her step away from the table. "I'm Peter. Nice to meet you, Helen." He hesitated, looking in the direction of his gate, then back at Helen, who was trying to adjust her grip on her walking cane. Peter took a deep breath. The right thing to do was clear, even if it came with consequences. "Gate 32B is a bit of a walk. Would you like me to help you get there?" he offered, already knowing what it might mean for his own travel plans. Helen looked genuinely relieved. "If it's not too much trouble. My daughter dropped me off, but she couldn't come in because she had to get back to work. I thought I could manage on my own, but this airport seems to have grown since the last time I was here." "It's no trouble," Peter assured her, even as a voice in the back of his mind screamed about the Chicago meeting. He quickly pulled out his phone and sent a text to his colleague, Mike. "Might be cutting it close for boarding. If you get on before me, save an aisle seat." As they began walking at Helen's careful pace, Peter realized just how far Gate 32B actually was. The airport was massive, and they would need to take the shuttle train to another terminal. "So, Peter, what takes you to the airport today?" Helen asked as they slowly made their way toward the shuttle station. "I'm heading to Chicago for a business meeting." Peter replied, trying to keep any hint of stress out of his voice. What kind of business are you in? Helen seemed genuinely interested, not just making small talk. Marketing. I work for a company that helps businesses connect with their customers better. Peter was surprised at how easily the conversation flowed, despite his inner turmoil about potentially missing his flight. They reached the shuttle station, and Peter helped Helen onto the train when it arrived. As they rode to the next terminal, Helen shared stories about her granddaughter, a doctor who had postponed having children until she was established in her career. She's just like her mother, my daughter, so determined and focused. I told her there's no perfect time for children. Life just keeps happening, ready or not. Helen chuckled, but she wanted everything to be just right. And now little Lily is here, and suddenly nothing else matters to her. Peter smiled, thinking of his own mother who often hinted about grandchildren. At 34, with his focus entirely on his career, that milestone seemed distant. When they got off the shuttle, Peter checked his watch again and felt his stomach drop. Only 8 minutes until his boarding would begin. Even if he left Helen now and ran back, he would likely miss it. His phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Where are you? They just called for priority boarding. Peter looked at Helen, who was carefully stepping off the shuttle, her cane tapping against the floor. He couldn't just leave her here halfway to her destination. Making a quick decision, Peter texted Mike. Not going to make it. Something came up. Tell Tom I'll catch the next flight and be there for the afternoon portion. Then he sent a message to Tom directly. Emergency situation. Taking next flight out. We'll be there for 2 p.m. portion of meeting without fail. Mike has all materials if you need to start without me. Putting his phone away, Peter felt a strange mix of anxiety and calm. Yes, Tom would be furious. Yes, this could potentially damage his standing at the company. But watching Helen's careful steps, he knew he was making the right choice. Everything all right, dear? Helen asked, noticing his expression. Everything's fine, Peter assured her with a genuine smile. Let's get you to your gate. As they continued their slow journey through the terminal, Helen told Peter about her late husband who had been a pilot for 40 years. He would have loved the planes they have nowadays. So much technology. In his day, it was all manual controls and paper maps. Peter found himself fascinated by her stories, momentarily forgetting about his missed flight and the potential career fallout. He always said the most important quality in a person isn't intelligence or talent, but character, Helen continued. That's something I've found to be true in my 82 years. Character reveals itself in the choices we make when no one is watching, or when those choices are difficult. Peter felt a warmth spread through him at her words, as if she somehow knew exactly what he needed to hear in that moment. When they finally reached Gate 32B, Peter felt an odd sense of accomplishment, as if he'd completed an important mission rather than simply helping someone to their gate. Thank you so much, Peter, Helen said warmly as he set her bag down next to a seat in the waiting area. You've been incredibly kind, and I'm very grateful. It was my pleasure, really, Peter replied, and was surprised to find he meant it sincerely. Despite everything, Helen reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. I don't have many friends left at my age, but I'd like to stay in touch if that's all right with you. Perhaps we could have tea sometime. Peter took the card with a smile, tucking it into his jacket pocket without really looking at it. I'd like that, Helen. As he turned to leave, already planning his explanation to Tom and how to book the next flight to Chicago, Peter felt lighter somehow. Missing his flight should have felt like a disaster, but instead, it felt like exactly where he was meant to be. He didn't know it yet, but that simple choice, helping a stranger with no expectation of reward, had just set in motion a chain of events that would transform his life in ways he could never imagine. Peter stood at the Airline customer service desk, trying to keep his frustration in check. The helpful gesture that had seemed so clearly right just 30 minutes ago was now looking like a serious career misstep. I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson, but the next direct flight to Chicago is fully booked. We can put you on standby, but with the business travel rush, I can't make any promises, the airline representative explained, her fingers moving rapidly over her keyboard. Peter ran a hand through his hair. What about connecting flights? I need to be in Chicago by 2 p.m. for a critical meeting. The representative frowned slightly. There's one option with a stop in Detroit, but the layover is tight. If the first leg is delayed at all, you'd miss your connection. Peter checked his watch. It was just past 9 a.m. The meeting was scheduled for noon, with his presentation at 2 p.m. Even in the best-case scenario, he'd be cutting it extremely close. "Book me on that one, please," he said, handing over his credit card. As the representative processed his new ticket, his phone rang. Tom's name flashed on the screen. Peter took a deep breath before answering. "Where the hell are you?" Tom's voice was sharp with anger. "I missed my flight," Peter replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm booking the next available one now." "Missed it? How? You were supposed to be there 3 hours early." Tom wasn't even trying to hide his displeasure. Peter hesitated. Somehow, explaining that he'd missed his flight to help an elderly woman seemed like it would sound like a made-up excuse. There was an unexpected situation. "I'm handling it. I'll be there for my presentation slot at 2 p.m. without fail." "You better be. The client specifically asked about your market analysis. Mike can cover the morning, but if you're not there by 2, don't bother coming back to the office." Tom hung up without waiting for a response. The airline representative gave Peter a sympathetic look as she handed him his new boarding pass. "Gate 15B, boarding starts in 40 minutes. Peter thanked her and headed toward his new gate, stomach growling as he remembered the coffee and muffin he'd abandoned to help Helen. He found a small cafe near his gate and ordered a sandwich and coffee. Sitting down at a corner table to gather his thoughts, as he ate, he pulled out Helen's business card from his pocket, looking at it properly for the first time. His sandwich froze halfway to his mouth as he read, "Helen Reynolds, founder and chairwoman emeritus, Skyway Airlines." Peter stared at the card in disbelief. Skyway Airlines was one of the largest carriers in the country, with a fleet of over 300 aircraft, and he had just helped its founder through the airport, completely unaware of who she was. He flipped the card over and noticed a handwritten phone number on the back with a small note. "My private line. Thank you again for your kindness. HR." Peter sat back in his chair, processing this information. The frail woman he'd helped was actually a powerful business figure, someone who had built an airline empire from scratch, in an era when few women held such positions. He remembered reading about Helen Reynolds in a business magazine feature about pioneering women in aviation, but he'd never seen a photo of her and certainly hadn't expected to encounter her struggling with her luggage at an airport coffee shop. His thoughts were interrupted by an announcement over the PA system. "Attention passengers, due to maintenance issues, Flight 2187 to Detroit is delayed by approximately 1 hour. We apologize for any inconvenience." Peter's heart sank. A 1-hour delay meant he would almost certainly miss his connection to Chicago. He'd never make it to the meeting on time now. As if on cue, his phone rang again. Mike this time. "Hey, Tom's on the warpath," Mike said without preamble. "The clients are asking where you are." "What happened, man?" Peter explained about missing his flight and the delay with his connection, keeping his voice low. "You're toast," Mike said bluntly. "Tom's already talking about giving your accounts to Dave." Peter closed his eyes. Dave had been gunning for Peter's position for months, and this was exactly the opportunity he needed. 3 years of hard work potentially gone because of one decision. "Look," Mike continued, slightly more sympathetically, "I'll do what I can to stall, but it doesn't look good. Can you at least email me your presentation slides so I can try to cover for you?" "I'll send them right away," Peter promised, already pulling out his laptop. "And thanks, Mike, I owe you one." After sending the files to Mike, Peter sat back in his chair, feeling a mixture of regret and defiance. Yes, missing this meeting could seriously damage his career, but even knowing the consequences, he couldn't imagine having left Helen struggling on her own. Some choices transcended career ambitions. Almost without thinking, he found himself looking at Helen's business card again. On impulse, he took out his phone and dialed the number on the back. It rang 3 times before Helen's now familiar voice answered. "Hello, Helen? This is Peter Wilson. We met at the airport this morning." Peter wasn't entirely sure why he was calling. It wasn't like a business titan could or should fix his problems. "Peter, how lovely to hear from you. Did you make your flight to Chicago?" "Actually, no," Peter admitted. "I missed it, and now my connection is delayed. I'm going to miss an important client meeting." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I see, and this meeting was significant for your career?" "Very. My boss is not happy." That was putting it mildly. "I'm sorry to hear that," Helen said, genuine concern in her voice. "Would you mind telling me which airline you're flying with today?" Transamerican, Peter replied, surprised by the question. And your flight number for the delayed connection? Peter glanced at his boarding pass. Flight 2187 to Detroit. I see. And you need to be in Chicago by 2 p.m., correct? Yes, but with this delay, it's looking impossible now. Peter, Helen's voice had taken on a different tone, sharper, more businesslike. Would you please go to the Transamerican customer service desk right away? Ask for the station manager. Tell them Helen Reynolds suggested they might be able to assist you. Peter blinked in surprise. Are you sure? I don't want to cause any trouble. A soft chuckle came through the phone. You won't be causing trouble, dear. Just a bit of airline courtesy. Call me back when you've spoken with them. Confused but hopeful, Peter gathered his belongings and headed to the customer service desk. The line was long with frustrated passengers from the delayed flight, but Peter went directly to a side desk marked Premium Services. The agent looked up with a practiced smile. Can I help you, sir? I need to speak with the station manager, please, Peter said, feeling slightly awkward. Helen Reynolds suggested they might be able to assist me. The agent's smile froze and her eyes widened slightly. Mrs. Reynolds, one moment, please. She picked up a phone and spoke quietly for a few moments before looking back at Peter. The station manager will be right with you, sir. May I have your name? Peter Wilson. Less than 2 minutes later, a man in a sharp suit approached, hand extended. Mr. Wilson? I'm Robert Chen, station manager. Mrs. Reynolds contacted our executive office. I understand you need to get to Chicago urgently? Peter nodded, still somewhat bewildered by the rapid response. Yes, I have a meeting at 2 p.m. that I can't miss. Not a problem. We're putting you on our direct corporate shuttle that departs in 30 minutes. It's normally reserved for crew transfers, but Mrs. Reynolds has authorized your passage. You'll be in Chicago by noon. Peter was speechless for a moment. Thank you. That's incredible. Robert smiled. Mrs. Reynolds doesn't make requests like this often, but when she does, we listen. This way, please. As Peter followed Robert through a private security channel and toward a small terminal he hadn't even known existed, he called Helen back. Problem solved? She asked when she answered. Helen, I don't know how to thank you, Peter said, genuine gratitude in his voice. They're putting me on some kind of corporate shuttle. How did you do that? Let's just say that when you've been in the airline business as long as I have, you develop a few useful connections, Helen replied with a hint of amusement. Besides, it seems only fair since it was helping me that caused you to miss your flight in the first place. I'd make the same choice again, Peter said honestly, even knowing what was at stake. That's why I made the call, dear. Character matters. Now do well in your meeting, and perhaps when you return, we can have that tea I mentioned. I'd like that, Peter said, still amazed at the turn of events. 30 minutes later, Peter found himself on a small but luxurious jet, with only 5 other passengers. All airline crew headed to Chicago. The flight attendant informed him they would arrive at a private terminal at O'Hare, where a car would be waiting to take him directly to his meeting location. As the plane took off, Peter looked out the window at the clouds below. Just hours ago, he had been rushing through the airport, focused solely on his career. A simple act of kindness had first threatened to derail everything he'd worked for, and then, through an unbelievable twist of fate, had connected him with someone who could not only solve his immediate problem but potentially open doors he hadn't even imagined. He thought about what Helen had said about character, revealing itself in difficult choices. Perhaps there was more to success than just ambition and hard work. Perhaps sometimes doing the right thing actually was its own reward, with occasional unexpected bonuses. Peter smiled to himself as the plane leveled off above the clouds. He had a feeling that missing his original flight might turn out to be the best career move he'd ever made. Though not in any way he could have predicted, sometimes life's most important turns come disguised as detours. His phone buzzed with a text from Mike, where are you? Tom's having a meltdown, Peter typed back. On my way. We'll be there by noon. Tell Tom to save his blood pressure for the competition. Then he sat back, closed his eyes, and for the first time that day, truly relaxed. The sleek black town car pulled up to the glass-fronted office building in downtown Chicago at precisely 11:45 a.m. Peter straightened his tie and thanked the driver, who had already retrieved his carry-on from the trunk. Good luck with your meeting, sir, the driver said with a friendly nod. Peter took a deep breath as he walked through the revolving doors into the lobby. The morning had been a roller coaster of emotions. From the stress of nearly missing his flight, to the crushing realization that he had indeed missed it, to the amazing stroke of luck in meeting Helen Reynolds and her unexpected assistance. Now, against all odds, he was actually early for the meeting that just hours ago had seemed hopelessly out of reach. He texted Mike. In the lobby. Coming up. The elevator whisked him to the 37th floor. As the doors opened, he saw Mike waiting, his expression a mix of relief and confusion. "How the heck did you get here so fast?" Mike asked, leading Peter toward a conference room. "Your original flight just landed 20 minutes ago," Peter smiled. "It's a long story. Let's just say I had an unexpected guardian angel." Mike lowered his voice as they approached the conference room. "Well, your guardian angel saved your job. Tom was this close to calling Dave in to take over your accounts." He held up his thumb and index finger with barely a space between them. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Peter could see Tom speaking animatedly to 3 people in business attire, the clients from Westbrook Industries. Tom glanced up, did a double-take when he saw Peter, and quickly excused himself. "Wilson," he said as he stepped into the hallway, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Nice of you to join us after all." "I apologize for the confusion this morning," Peter said calmly. "But as I promised, I'm here well ahead of my presentation slot." Tom's eyes narrowed. "We'll discuss your unreliability later. Right now, the clients are waiting." He turned to Mike. "The files you sent over were incomplete. Please tell me you brought the full presentation package," he said to Peter. Peter patted his laptop bag. "Everything's ready to go. And I've made some last-minute improvements to the strategy section based on their quarterly report that came out yesterday." Tom looked momentarily surprised, then nodded curtly and led them back into the conference room. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Peter Wilson, our senior marketing strategist who will be walking you through the campaign proposal after lunch." Peter shook hands with each client, making eye contact and offering a warm smile. The lead client, a woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes named Linda Patterson, held his gaze a moment longer than the others. "We've heard good things about your work, Mr. Wilson. Looking forward to your presentation." "Thank you. I'm excited to show you what we've developed," Peter replied. The morning portion of the meeting went smoothly, with Tom and Mike covering the background research and market analysis. Throughout the discussion, Peter noticed Linda occasionally glancing at him with an appraising look. It was slightly unnerving, but he focused on taking notes and preparing for his portion after lunch. When they broke for the meal, catered in the conference room, Peter's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "How did you get to Chicago so quickly? The airline says you weren't on your scheduled flight." Peter stared at the message in confusion before realizing it had to be from Tom, who must have checked with the airline. He decided not to respond immediately, unsure of how to explain without sounding like he was making up an unbelievable story. As they ate, Linda moved to sit beside Peter. "So, Mr. Wilson, tell me something that's not in your proposal. Why should Westbrook trust your vision for our brand?" Peter considered the question carefully. "Because I believe in authentic connections," he said finally. "Marketing isn't just about clever slogans or trending hashtags. It's about understanding what truly matters to people and showing them how your product or service aligns with those values." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "And what matters to people, in your view? Trust, respect, the feeling that their needs are genuinely being considered." Peter thought about his experience with Helen that morning. And sometimes it's about making the right choice even when it's inconvenient or costly in the short term. A slight smile played at the corners of Linda's mouth. "Interesting perspective. I look forward to seeing how that translates into your campaign strategy." After lunch, Peter set up his laptop for the presentation. As the room darkened and his carefully designed slides appeared on the large screen, he felt a familiar sense of calm settle over him. This was his element, communicating ideas, telling stories that resonated, creating connections between brands and people. For the next hour, he walked the clients through the proposed marketing campaign, emphasizing the authentic brand voice they had developed based on Westbrook's company values and history. He showed mock-ups of advertisements that focused on real customers and their experiences rather than flashy gimmicks. "What we're proposing isn't just a marketing campaign," he concluded. "It's a genuine conversation with your customers that acknowledges their intelligence and respects their time." It's about building trust, not just transactions. When the lights came back up, there was a moment of silence. Then Linda began to applaud, with her colleagues quickly joining in. "That was exceptional, Mr. Wilson," she said. "Exactly the fresh approach we've been looking for." Tom looked both relieved and impressed. "Well, I think we can all agree that Peter has knocked this one out of the park." The meeting wrapped up with handshakes all around and promises to send over the final contract details the next day. As the clients left, Tom clapped Peter on the shoulder. "Whatever happened this morning, you more than made up for it," he said. "Linda told me they were ready to sign before you even finished." "I've never seen her so impressed." Peter smiled, grateful for the success but still processing the whirlwind day. "Thanks, Tom. Mind if I head back to the hotel? It's been quite a day and I'd like to prepare for tomorrow's follow-up." "Go ahead. We'll celebrate properly tomorrow after they sign the contract." Outside the building, Peter loosened his tie and took a deep breath of the crisp Chicago air. He pulled out his phone and saw 3 missed calls from the same unknown number that had texted him earlier, presumably Tom checking on his flight status before the meeting. There was also a text message from Helen. "Hope your meeting went well. Tea when you return?" Peter smiled and replied to Helen. "Meeting was a huge success. Would love to have tea. Thank you again for your help." Then on impulse he added, "I have a question though. How did you know I was flying to Chicago when we first met?" "I don't remember mentioning my destination." The reply came almost immediately. "You mentioned a business meeting. I asked where as we walked, but you were checking your watch at that moment. I said Chicago and you nodded. I assumed you were agreeing." Peter frowned slightly, trying to remember the conversation. It was possible he'd been distracted and simply nodded without hearing properly, but something felt off about the explanation. He was so deep in thought that he nearly bumped into someone on the sidewalk. "Excuse me?" he started to say, then froze in surprise. "Linda?" Linda Patterson from Westbrook Industries stood before him, now wearing a coat against the Chicago chill. "Mr. Wilson, I hoped I might catch you before you left," she said with a smile. "Is everything all right with the proposal?" Peter asked, immediately concerned. "The proposal is perfect," Linda assured him. "This is about something else. I received a rather interesting phone call this morning from an old friend of mine, Helen Reynolds." Peter's mouth fell open slightly. "You know Helen?" Linda nodded, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "We've been friends for over 30 years. She called to tell me about a kind young man who missed his flight to help her at the airport. Said I should keep an eye out for him at my meeting today." Peter was speechless. The coincidence seemed impossible. "She didn't mention your name," Linda continued, "but described you quite well. When you walked into that conference room early, looking a bit windswept but completely prepared, I knew it had to be you." I had no idea," Peter managed finally. "Helen has always believed in the importance of character," Linda said, "and she has an uncanny knack for spotting it in others. Your presentation today was brilliant, but it was what Helen told me about you that sealed the deal for Westbrook. We want to work with people who live their values, not just pitch them in slick presentations." Peter felt a rush of emotions, surprise, gratitude, and a touch of suspicion. Had this entire day been some kind of elaborate test? As if reading his thoughts, Linda shook her head. "This wasn't planned, if that's what you're wondering. Helen really did need help this morning, and you really did impress her with your kindness. The rest is just serendipity." She handed him a business card. "My direct number. I have a feeling we'll be working together quite a bit in the coming months." As Linda walked away, Peter stood on the sidewalk, business card in hand, trying to process everything. His phone buzzed again, another text from Helen. "By the way, I'm having dinner with my dear friend Linda tonight. She mentioned your presentation was outstanding." Small world, isn't it? Peter laughed out loud, startling a passing businessman. Small world indeed. Or perhaps, as he was beginning to suspect, a world where kindness created connections in ways he never could have imagined. He tucked both business cards carefully into his wallet and headed toward his hotel, wondering what other surprises this extraordinary day might still hold. 3 days later, Peter settled into his window seat on the flight back home, his mind still processing the events of his Chicago trip. The Westbrook contract had been signed yesterday morning, the largest account his company had ever secured. Tom had been practically giddy during their celebration dinner last night, already talking about the possibility of opening a Chicago office with Peter at the helm. It was a career-making opportunity, and yet Peter found himself more preoccupied with thoughts of Helen Reynolds and the strange web of connections that seemed to be forming around him since their chance meeting at the airport, pulled out his phone to check his messages before the flight took off. Among the congratulatory texts from colleagues was one from Helen. "Looking forward to our tea tomorrow at 3. My driver will pick you up at 2:30. The address is already in his GPS." Peter smiled. He hadn't actually confirmed a day or time for tea, but somehow Helen had arranged it anyway. There was something both endearing and slightly unsettling about her quiet efficiency. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Peter opened his laptop to review notes from the meetings. He found himself unusually distracted, his thoughts drifting to questions about Helen. How had she built her airline empire? What was her connection to Linda beyond friendship? And why did she seem so interested in him? A mid-level marketing executive she'd met by chance. The flight attendant stopped by his row.
"Can I get you anything to drink, sir?"
"Just water, please," Peter replied, closing his laptop. "Of course. And Mrs. Reynolds asked that we take special care of you on your flight home. Can I bring you something from first class? Perhaps a cheese plate or some wine?" Peter blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Reynolds? Helen Reynolds?" The flight attendant nodded. "Yes, sir. She called our customer service department personally." "I'm fine with just water, thank you," Peter said, feeling slightly embarrassed by the special attention. After the attendant moved on, Peter leaned back in his seat. The situation was becoming more curious by the minute. He had only known Helen for a few days, and yet her influence seemed to be everywhere. When he landed, he found a text from Tom. "Need to talk ASAP. Call when you land." Feeling a flutter of concern, Peter called as he walked through the terminal. "Wilson, great news." Tom's voice boomed through the phone. "Just got off a call with Westbrook. They want to fast-track the campaign launch, and get this, they're recommending us to Sky Travel for their rebranding." Peter stopped walking. "Sky Travel? The travel booking platform?" "The very same. Apparently Linda Patterson sits on their board and sang your praises. This could double the size of our company, Peter." "That's incredible," Peter said, genuinely stunned. "I've already set up a meeting for next week. Start thinking big, this is your baby now." After hanging up, Peter continued toward the exit, his mind racing. Sky Travel was a major player in the online travel industry, and if he remembered correctly from his business magazine reading, it had been founded by Helen Reynolds' daughter about 15 years ago. The connections were becoming too numerous to be coincidental. Either the universe was playing an elaborate practical joke, or Helen Reynolds was orchestrating opportunities for him behind the scenes. But why? The next afternoon, precisely at 2:30, a black car with tinted windows pulled up in front of Peter's apartment building. The driver, a professional-looking man in his 50s, opened the rear door for Peter. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wilson. I'm Frank, Mrs. Reynolds' driver. We're heading to her home in Riverview Heights." Riverview Heights was the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, home to old money and business elite. Peter had never had reason to visit the area before. After a 30-minute drive through increasingly impressive neighborhoods, they turned onto a private road that wound through manicured grounds. At the end stood a stately brick mansion with white columns and floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't ostentatious, but it exuded quiet wealth and dignified taste. Frank led Peter to a sun-filled room at the back of the house overlooking gardens that stretched to the river beyond. Helen was already seated at a small table, looking much as she had at the airport, though more at ease in a simple but elegant blue dress. "Peter, how wonderful to see you again," she said warmly, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Please sit. The tea will be here shortly." "This is quite a home," Peter said, taking in the tasteful artwork and antique furniture. "It's seen 3 generations of my family," Helen replied. "I grew up here, raised my daughter here, and now I enjoy watching my great-granddaughter toddle around the same gardens I played in as a child." A housekeeper arrived with a tea tray and set it between them. "Thank you, Dorothy," Helen said. Once they were alone, she poured the tea with practiced hands. "I understand the Westbrook meetings went exceptionally well." "They did," Peter said, accepting the cup she offered. "Though I suspect I have you to thank for that, at least in part." Helen's eyes twinkled. "Linda makes her own decisions. I merely mentioned that I'd met a young man who impressed me with his character. And Sky Travel? Was that your doing as well?" Peter asked directly. Helen sipped her tea. "My daughter Catherine runs Sky Travel." But Linda sits on the board, as you may know. If they're considering your firm, it's because Linda believes in your work. Peter set down his cup. Mrs. Reynolds, Helen, please. Helen, he corrected himself. I appreciate your help more than I can express, but I need to understand what's happening here. Why did you call the airline for me? Why mention me to Linda? We only met by chance at the airport. Helen studied him for a moment. Did you know that my husband died 23 years ago? The abrupt change of subject caught Peter off guard. No, I didn't. William was the love of my life. We built the airline together, though his name was the one in the press back then. Times were different for women in business. She smiled at some private memory. When he passed away, I was devastated, of course, but also faced with running the company alone. She rose and walked to a side table, returning with a framed photograph. This was William. Peter looked at the black and white photo of a distinguished-looking man with kind eyes and a confident smile. The day of his funeral, Helen continued, I was leaving the cemetery when I dropped my glove. A young man, a stranger, picked it up and ran after me to return it. He missed his bus to do so. It was such a small thing, but on that terrible day, that simple act of kindness meant everything to me. She took the photo back and gazed at it fondly. That young man was Robert Chen, the station manager at the airport. Peter asked, connecting the dots. Yes, though he wasn't then, of course. He was just a college student working part-time. I asked for his name, tracked him down, and offered him a job at the airline when he graduated. Over 30 years, he worked his way up from customer service to station manager. He's retiring next month. Helen set the photo aside and looked directly at Peter. I've learned to recognize genuine kindness, Peter. It's rarer than you might think. People are often kind when it's easy or when they want something. But true character shows itself when being kind comes at a personal cost. She smiled. You gave up an important flight to help an old woman you'd never met before. You didn't know who I was. You didn't expect anything in return. That tells me everything I need to know about you. Peter felt a wave of emotion at her words. I just did what anyone would do. But that's precisely it, not everyone would. Most would have expressed sympathy and hurried on to their gate. Helen leaned forward slightly. I've spent my life building a company that values character alongside competence. As I approach the end of my career, I find myself noticing those same qualities in others. So all of this, the help with my flight, the connection to Linda, it was some kind of test? Peter asked. Helen laughed softly. Not a test, no. Life has a way of revealing people's true nature without my interference. I simply noticed what was already there and mentioned it to people who might appreciate those qualities as I do. A comfortable silence fell between them as Peter absorbed her words. There was wisdom in what she was saying, though he still felt there might be more to the story than she was sharing. Now, Helen said, changing the subject, tell me about this campaign you've designed for Westbrook. Linda was quite impressed, and she's not easily impressed. For the next hour, they talked business with Helen asking insightful questions that showed her sharp mind and decades of experience. Peter found himself both challenged and inspired by her perspective. As their conversation wound down, Helen mentioned casually, Catherine, my daughter, is hosting a dinner next week for some of SkyTravel's executive team and board members. Linda will be there, of course. Would you be interested in attending? Peter recognized the opportunity being offered. I'd be honored. Excellent. Frank will send you the details. Helen set down her teacup. One more thing, Peter. I don't believe in coincidences, but I do believe in paying attention when the universe puts someone in your path. Our meeting may have seemed random, but perhaps it was exactly where both of us needed to be at that moment. As Frank drove him home later that afternoon, Peter gazed out at the city passing by, Helen's words echoing in his mind. Whatever forces had brought them together, coincidence, fate, or simply the butterfly effect of small decisions, he couldn't deny that his life had taken an unexpected turn since helping an elderly woman with her luggage. His phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Catherine Reynolds, CEO of SkyTravel, with the subject line, Dinner invitation and potential opportunity. The message was brief and to the point. My mother speaks highly of you. Looking forward to discussing how your approach might align with SkyTravel's rebranding needs. Peter smiled to himself. It seemed the ripples from his simple act of kindness were still spreading outward. creating possibilities he never could have imagined when he woke up that morning at the airport. 6 months later, Peter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new office, gazing out at the city skyline. The Sky Travel logo glowed on the wall behind his desk, a constant reminder of how much his life had changed since that fateful morning at the airport. The dinner at Catherine Reynolds' home had been the beginning of a whirlwind of opportunities. What started as a conversation about the Westbrook campaign had evolved into an unexpected job offer. Director of Brand Strategy for Sky Travel, reporting directly to Catherine herself. Leaving Turner Marketing hadn't been an easy decision. Tom had been shocked and had offered a substantial raise to keep him, but the opportunity at Sky Travel was too significant to pass up. It wasn't just the impressive salary or the corner office. It was the chance to reshape the brand of a major company, to implement the authentic connection philosophy he'd always believed in, but rarely had the freedom to fully explore. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Got a minute?" Catherine Reynolds stood in the doorway, as poised and direct as always. At 58, she had her mother's sharp intelligence but none of Helen's gentle manner. Where Helen was warm and thoughtful, Catherine was brilliant and efficient, a businesswoman who had built Sky Travel from a small startup into a billion-dollar company through sheer determination and vision. "Of course," Peter said, gesturing to the chairs by his desk. Catherine sat down, placing a folder between them. The quarterly numbers came in. "Your rebranding campaign is outperforming projections by 23%. Peter tried to contain his excitement. "That's fantastic news." "It is. The board is pleased." She opened the folder, revealing charts and data. "Customer engagement is up across all platforms, and the authenticity rating, that metric you insisted we track, has increased by 31% since launch." "People respond to honesty," Peter said. "When we stopped trying to sell them a perfect vacation and started acknowledging the real challenges of travel while offering genuine solutions, they listened." Catherine nodded. "My mother said you understood people. She was right." She closed the folder and fixed him with her direct gaze. "Which brings me to why I'm here. We need to talk about expansion." For the next hour, they discussed Catherine's plans to grow Sky Travel beyond its current markets, with Peter's branding strategy as a centerpiece of the approach. It was exhilarating work, challenging in all the right ways. As their meeting concluded, Catherine paused at the door. "By the way, Mom's birthday dinner is this Saturday. She specifically asked if you could come, 7 o'clock at her house." "I wouldn't miss it," Peter replied with a smile. After Catherine left, Peter turned back to the window, reflecting on how Helen had become a regular part of his life over the past 6 months. Their weekly tea had evolved into a genuine friendship that transcended their age difference. He valued her wisdom, and she seemed to enjoy his fresh perspective on business and life. Saturday evening found Peter once again driving up the winding road to Helen's mansion. The grounds were lit with tasteful landscape lighting, and several luxury cars were already parked in the circular driveway. Helen's birthday dinner was clearly an exclusive affair. Frank met him at the door with a warm handshake. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson." They're gathered in the main living room. Peter followed the sounds of conversation through the grand foyer. About 20 people stood in small groups throughout the elegant living room, drinks in hand. He recognized a few faces: Linda Patterson from Westbrook, Robert Chen from the airport, and several Sky Travel executives. Helen sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, regal in a simple midnight blue dress. Her face lit up when she saw Peter. "There you are," she said as he approached. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten an old woman on her birthday." Peter bent to kiss her cheek. "Never. Happy birthday, Helen." "Thank you, dear. There's someone I'd like you to meet." She gestured to a woman about Peter's age standing nearby. "This is my granddaughter, Abby. She's just moved back from London to take over some of Catherine's responsibilities, while Catherine focuses on the expansion." The woman turned, and Peter found himself looking into intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, just like Helen's. "So you're Peter," Abby said, extending her hand. "Grandma has told me all about you. The airport hero who missed his flight." Peter laughed as they shook hands. "I think your grandmother has built that story into something much more dramatic than it was." "Don't believe him," Helen said with a wink. "He's too modest for his own good." As dinner was announced, Helen insisted that Peter sit on her right with Abby on her left. The meal was superb, the conversation engaging, and Peter found himself thoroughly enjoying the company. He and Abby discovered a shared love of classic films and hiking, and she had a quick wit that kept him laughing throughout the evening. After the birthday cake was served, Catherine tapped her glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast to my remarkable mother on her 83rd birthday," she began. "Mom, you've always led by example, showing us that success comes not just from smart business decisions, but from valuing people and recognizing the importance of character." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. "Those lessons continue to shape sky travel," Catherine continued. "And they're at the heart of our next big step." She looked directly at Helen. "Which is why the board and I would like to announce the creation of the Helen Reynolds Foundation for Character in Business, an organization dedicated to identifying and supporting young entrepreneurs who demonstrate the values you've championed throughout your career." Helen's hand flew to her heart, genuine surprise on her face. "Catherine, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Mom, but I do need to introduce the Foundation's first director." Catherine turned her gaze to Peter. "If he accepts the position." Peter nearly choked on his water. "Me," he managed to say after a moment. Catherine nodded. "In addition to your role at Sky Travel, of course. The Foundation needs someone who truly understands what my mother has always known, that character matters in business. That kindness is a strength, not a weakness." Peter looked at Helen, who was watching him with bright eyes. "Did you know about this?" he asked her quietly. "Not a word," she replied, though the slight smile playing at her lips made him wonder. Later, as guests began to depart, Peter found himself on the terrace with Abby, both nursing glasses of brandy in the cool night air. "So will you accept?" she asked, leaning against the stone balustrade. "I think so," Peter replied. "It's an incredible opportunity to make a difference." Abby studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when Grandma first told me about you, I was skeptical. People aren't usually as good as she made you sound." Peter laughed. "I'm definitely not. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "See, that's just it," Abby said. "Most people wouldn't see helping an elderly woman as being in the right place. They'd see it as an inconvenience, especially with a flight to catch." She moved slightly closer. "I've learned to trust Grandma's judgment about people. She sees things others miss." The terrace door opened and Helen appeared wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. "There you two are," she said with a knowing smile. "Getting acquainted, I see." "Just discussing the Foundation," Peter said quickly. Helen replied, clearly not believing him. "Well, don't discuss too long. It's getting chilly out here." She turned to go back inside, then paused. "Oh, Peter, before I forget, I've arranged for a car to take you to the airport on Tuesday for your Chicago trip. Frank will pick you up at 8 a.m. Peter had mentioned the trip only once in passing weeks ago. He shouldn't have been surprised that Helen remembered and had already made arrangements. After Helen went back inside, Peter and Abby shared a laugh. "Does she ever stop orchestrating things?" Peter asked. "Never," Abby replied with affection. "It's her superpower. She sees possibilities and connections that others miss, and then she quietly makes them happen." Peter thought back to that morning 6 months ago, how a simple choice to help someone had altered the course of his life in ways he never could have imagined. The missed flight that had seemed like a disaster had led him here, to a new career, new purpose, and new relationships. "Your grandmother once told me she doesn't believe in coincidences," Peter said. "She doesn't," Abby agreed. "She believes in paying attention to what life puts in your path." She raised her glass. "To missed flights and found opportunities." Peter clinked his glass against hers. "And to the people who help us see them." Inside the house, Helen watched the two of them from the window, a satisfied smile on her face. Another connection made, another possibility set in motion. At 83, she had learned that the most valuable currency in life wasn't money or power, but the relationships we build and the differences we make in others' lives, sometimes through the smallest acts of kindness. The missed flight that had brought Peter into her world had been a fortunate accident, but what had followed was the result of recognizing the quality of his character and creating opportunities for that character to flourish. As she turned away from the window, leaving Peter and Abby to their conversation, Helen felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even as her own journey was nearing its end, the ripples from her lifetime of mindful connections would continue to spread outward, touching lives in ways that even she could not foresee. And that, she thought to herself, was the most meaningful legacy of all.